Welcome back to another Cool Rock podcast. I'm your host, Steve Roth, and my desire to do this podcast stems from the fact that there's few things I love talking about more than the music that I dig the most, particularly when I can talk about that music with the people who make it. Which is why I'm excited about this episode's guest, Richard Turgeon. Richard is a singer-songwriter, guitarist, a solo artist with 14 albums to his credit. His music can fit neatly under the power pop banner, and I regularly see his music at the various power pop pages I follow at social media, filled with crunchy guitars, terrific melodies, and hooks that stick in your head. Combine that with relatable and introspective lyrics, and it's all a perfect mix for me. Call it rock, call it power pop, whatever you want to call it. I call it really good. And he's someone I've been following and listening to for going on 5 or 6 years now, at least. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. I learned a lot about Richard's career, influences, his songwriting process, being a DIY artist, and we took a terrific sidebar talking about someone I'm fascinated with and love talking about, Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson, as Richard has recently optioned his first screenplay, Holyman, about Wilson and his relationship with Charlie Manson. We also talked in depth about Richard's newest single, Small Fry, which you can find at YouTube and at your favorite streaming providers. And Small Fry is off his forthcoming album, Shungite, which will likely be out towards the end of the summer. Talked about the making of the album, where his songwriting is going, how his sound is evolving, and a whole lot more. You can find out more about Richard at richardturgeon.com and at Facebook, along with all his music at his Bandcamp page and at Spotify and iTunes. Be sure to check out the links in the show notes. And now, enjoy my conversation with Richard Turgeon. Well, hey, Rich. Great to have you here.
Steve.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you doing this. And I just wanted to first tell you how I found your music. And it was a little bit differently, but I guess it's really kind of par for the course, if you will, about how people find music nowadays. And I found your music via a podcast, via the Bob Cesca podcast, I'd say 3 or 4 years ago. A political podcast I was digging, and he always played independent artists, and he would always post and mention their Bandcamp page. And I fell in love with this power pop song. That's really my bailiwick. That's the stuff that I love. And I went down a rabbit hole immediately, went to Bandcamp, Spotify, signed up for your email blasts and for your email newsletters, your emails, followed every single. And here we are, we're talking, and I really appreciate it. I love your music. I guess I want to start with, I've seen so many reviews that have referenced the Foo Fighters, Beach Boys, Matthew Sweet, the Beatles, all the stuff that I love. Who inspired you, and who did you first discover that kind of kicked it all off for you?
Wow, that is well, first of all, thanks for having me and all the nice words. I really, really appreciate that. And I love when people connect with, indie artists like me. I'm the marketer. I'm the one reaching out to bloggers and all that other stuff. So whenever somebody finds me, that's always a big treat. So, and I have Bob Cesca to thank for that. He's actually been a supporter of my music since literally like 1996 or 1997 when I was in a band called The Movies on the East Coast. It was like a power pop trio. And Bob picked us up somehow. I don't know how he caught on to us, but he did some nice write-ups for the Writing Eagle, which is like my hometown newspaper and all this stuff. And, we've just kept in touch over the years. And I started getting active again about 6-7 years ago and started sending him stuff. And he's just been a great supporter. So I wanted to give him a shout out and acknowledgement for that. But as far as I think I've been doing this a long time. I was in my first cover band, pop metal cover band, when I was like 13 with Richie Kotzen. He's a guitar player who's played with Poison and Ozzy Osbourne and stuff. But it was his thing.
I'm a huge Kotzen fan. I know his stuff really well. I had no idea there was a connection there, but I know he's from Pennsylvania.
Yes, yeah. So we lived like 5 minutes away from each other, and we were friends as kids. And then he was kind of a musical prodigy and started really getting into it. Like, he was light years beyond me. I was, kind of a burgeoning fan of music, of rock music, when I was like 13, and he was already like playing piano and, already an incredible guitarist. So I wanted to play drums in his thing. And I often did when we were more casual, but when he started to put something together, he was like, you sing. And we hired this guy, Chad Greenwald, super nice guy, great drummer. Yeah, and it just kind of formed around him. His dad was kind of the manager. And so that's really where it started with me. Like we all love like, the Scorpions and Journey and Survivor, AC/DC. I'm a huge Def Leppard fan. That was a real touchstone for me, was when they came up with Pyromania and stuff like that. Iron Maiden was my first concert with Richie and his mom.
Wow.
That was like, yeah, the Peace of Mind tour, 1983. So that's kind of when it all started. And I got more into film in high school and writing and things like that, which obviously I'm still a big part of, because we were talking about my screenplay stuff. And in college, I finally was able to get a drum kit. And it wasn't really until my senior year of college I picked up guitar. I taught myself guitar, and drums was like, I learned from air drumming, believe it or not, next to my parents' stereo. We didn't have a drum kit, and they wanted me to play trumpet, and they didn't want the drums in the house. So I really, like, in late college, transferred the air drumming to a kit, and it was actually faster than you would think. And so I quickly learned how to play drums. I was in a punk rock band. I started my first real band as a singer-songwriter when I was like 23 in Pittsburgh. Or I'm sorry, in Pittsburgh is the movies. And then I moved that band to Philadelphia. We were very active there in the mid 90s. And then when I moved to the Bay Area, I'd say like 18 years ago, something like that, I had a West Coast version of a live rock band doing my stuff called John Sound. So we played all over like Philadelphia. We played CBGB's in New York. We even played the Stone Pony in New Jersey when I was on the East Coast. And now at West, I played all the clubs in San Francisco. So yeah, and I'm still, playing out live with a 90s cover band. I just got together with these guys for my local Little League, but I've also got my original recording. So, I've been most active as a solo artist in the last 7-8 years, if that helps.
Gotcha.
Focus my answer here. Yeah, because it's been a journey. I've always been into recording, into performing, but as a singer-songwriter. But yeah, I've been active in Ray from Cool Cat Music. I've been on his little label since I put out In Between the Spaces in 2017. So he's been a real supporter. I feel like I kind of have like a home and a community with these other label mates. Yeah, which is great. So hopefully that brings us to today in terms of my music. That's like very broad strokes, but
sure,
big part of my life.
Yeah, I would bet our record collections are somewhat similar. I grew up with a lot of those same folks. I'm a little bit older than you, but I kind of went down the pop rabbit hole. I always had kind of ADHD, so jam bands, 7-8 minute long flights of fancy. I totally appreciated musicianship, but I need a great hook, a great chorus. It all started really with the Beatles and Beach Boys for me, and 70s pop music really, and then dovetailed into the harder rock stuff, but all stuff that was really melodic with great hooks. You mentioned Def Leppard for me. I totally dig them and really appreciate the musicianship of hard rock. I was going to mention too, that was your drumming journey was similar to mine, although nowhere near as accomplished. I started basically on air drums, graduated to a steering wheel, and found that my feet could keep fairly decent time in a car, and then later got behind a kid a bit. So
nice.
So yeah, very, I think it's a lot of people might say artists wear their influences on their sleeve, so to speak, but I think that just really shows kind of the inspiration behind it and what you take from it from there, if that makes sense.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I try to have do my own thing and not box myself in too much. I know I fall in. I like you. I like big hooks. I like guitars. I like drums, rock music. And I'm a big fan of the 90s stuff, not necessarily like grunge as a genre, but I was a huge Nirvana fan. I was actually I was a kid that watched 120 minutes on MTV. So like before alternative was a thing, it was like, this was experimental music back then. They would show that show, I think at like 11 or midnight or something on a weekend night. So, my musical education, believe it or not, began with like The Cure. I wasn't like a goth kid. I just loved their creativity and
Sure.
how they express themselves through music. And then I, I'm not so much I'm not so much ADD or cast a wide net with my listening habits. I'm more obsessive. I'm more OCD where, I can list out my musical obsessions in order, but like I named a bunch of pop metal bands like Maiden and whatnot. And then it was like Hall and Oates and then uh, The Cure. In college, I got obsessed with the Police. And then Nirvana came along and just blew my mind. And I was just all about Nirvana for a while they were around and Blink 182, Green Day, Weezer's Foo Fighters. But, there are a lot of bands that led up to that too, like that aren't mega superstars like the Breeders and Bob Mould and
Oh
Husker
yeah,
Du and Matthew Sweet, I think kind of falls into that camp. They had
sure,
hits in the 90s, but they
but not at
weren't
that bigger
like,
level.
yeah, not at that million. And that's kind of that sweet spot that I kind of like the Pixies, where I love big pop, big sounding, heavy productions like Nirvana, Green Day, and Weezer when they were working with, these better producers in their uh, later records, I guess, or when they were more established, not the indie label stuff. So, but there's this whole sort of set of trailblazers that really led up to the explosion, I guess, of alternative in the early '90s, and that's really like mostly my wheelhouse. I don't try to sound like, any one band. I kind of take bits and pieces from a lot of stuff over the years, but I probably called out some of my bigger influences. But I also have this other side too that is a little more chill and mellow. So I really like I went through this huge Eagles phase for a very long time. As I get older, I appreciate bands like Fleetwood Mac and the whole West Coast kind of, Laurel
Right.
Canyon scene. So I think that's part of me living in California and being influenced by being here and its heritage and its musical heritage and just kind of the culture has really given me an education on California music and that California sound. I usually refer to my sound as kind of like California rock because it's not straight up power pop per se. It's not classic rock. It's definitely not trying to be edgy indie
Right.
rock with weird sound effects and time signature stuff. It's straightforward pop rock, but with an indie edge, and then sometimes I just dial it back and get a little more chill with the sound. So
Yeah, and that's a good segue because I wanted to talk about that specifically, your songwriting. One thing I totally appreciate how prolific you have been. If I counted right, and I saw this on your website, you've done 5 albums and an EP since 2017, I think, which I
yeah,
really appreciate that because I love my favorite. I don't like waiting. I don't want to wait 4 years for my favorite artists and people I really admire to come out with new music.
oh, thank you.
Uh,
Yeah.
but what is your songwriting process like? I'm always fascinated by how songs and the recordings are created. And I mean, do you sit down with a goal to, I'm going to write an album, or is it kind of more of an evolutionary sort of thing? Or maybe it's not any
Mm.
of those things. By evolutionary, I mean, is it you've got some songs you've been working on and maybe you go back to something and suddenly you've got 10 or 12 songs and they're cohesive and they make an album?
No, that's a great question. That's the kind of stuff I actually really like talking about in addition to influences. But geez, where do I start? Songwriting is oh, well, first of all, I appreciate that about the productivity, I guess, because it's actually been since 2017. I'd have to take a look, but I think it's been six, 5 LPs, 2 or 3 EPs, and 2 sets of covers. All of my stuff is on iTunes and Spotify and Bandcamp. Bandcamp is really like the place to be because that's where, my new stuff will go there first before I turn singles into albums. But so I just kind of want to speak to the volume of stuff in the last 7 years. I've been very active on the recording front. I've actually had to dial it back a bit because I was putting out a song a month and it kind of got, it got to be, okay, I gotta chill a little here. I've said a lot in, a relatively short time frame, but I'm in that phase of life where I have the tools and the technology and the knowledge and the experience to kind of know what I want to say, how I want to say it, how I want it to sound as a producer, also as a songwriter. So that's probably a good segue into like the process itself for me, because I play most of the instruments, drums, guitars, the vocals, and I mix and master all that stuff. A good pace for me has been, these last several years, like a song a month, like I said. The actual writing of the song process, and I'll try to do this in broad strokes. It typically starts with some sort of idea in my head, or I'm playing something on guitar and it's like there's this good nugget. And then that nugget, okay, how can I turn that into a verse? How can I turn that into a chorus? How can I tape it together in an interesting way? And I usually, by that time of taping together, that's when I have a theme or a main lyric in mind, whether it's a line in the chorus or something like that. But I know what the song's about by then because I know what the music sounds like. And so for me, the lyrics is typically a layer on top of the song, or that comes at that sort of later stage of the writing itself.
Sure.
And then I'll just practice it. I often, most of the time, I write on my Strat without even plugging in. I just kind of like that quiet, way of playing things back for myself and really working on something until I'm like, okay, now it's ready to I'll turn it into a scratch track. I'll record that and then start to layer a song on top of that. And that's how it turns into, the stuff that you hear. As far as how albums goes, I typically, because I do one song a month or every 2 months now, more on the average or even longer, I'm just kind of spreading it out a bit more. The way this most recent one works is similar to previous, where I have kind of a theme in mind. Like this one is heavier. It's heavier and more aggressive than, it's still rock. It's still melodic. It's not like a change in direction for me, but it's more polished in terms of the production, I think, and more big and heavy sounding. So I'll see like a color, like this is the color of the album. This is the theme. This is the shape. And then I'll just kind of build that collection of songs and turn that into an album. Now that's a different process than most bands that are, touring or they're on a label or something like that, where it's like, oh, we have to do our next album. Let's write 10 songs. And then we work on those and we go into a studio for like a month or however long it is and record them. I don't batch things that way. Typically, I really like to give, because I play like most of the stuff and I'm producing it, I like to give attention to that song that month, as opposed to like, yeah, I've got like 2 or 3 things going on at a time. I'm writing, obviously sometimes things overlap or I have more than one idea at a time, but I just find that that's like the most practical and efficient way for me to work as I build an album, if that makes sense.
Right, right. And I was thinking too, because you're an indie musician. It's all DIY. You're self-contained, playing the music, recording every bit of it. So I would imagine you got to have some pretty strong organizational skills to keep all this thing together and
Yeah.
stay on the path creatively, but also organizationally to basically accomplish what you're looking to do.
I'm
Do it
I'm
affordably
laughing
and
because
effectively.
no, I love that you're saying that, because a lot of times when I'm like, if I have a new record coming out, or we talked about screenplays earlier, it's not like, oh, like what's it about, or like what does it sound like, or it's usually like, how do you find the time? And you really do have to be organized. I have 2 young kids, they're 10 and 12. I've got a family and a full-time job and all this other stuff going on. So it really does take setting aside time. I mean, for me, it's like, obviously it's like nights and weekends. That's when I'm most active in, creating my music. But like, you really just need to set aside the time. And for me, it's a discipline. If I want to hear a song as an artist in my head, that's being an artist, like you have to hear what's in your head. If you're a painter, you have to execute on what your vision in your head. It's a need. It's like going to the bathroom, really. For me, I kind of have to do it. But to do that and to not just have it kind of like go off into the ether and disappear or just not exist, like you really have to make it a goal, to say, I have a rough schedule of when I record or when I work on my music, that sort of thing. And it's very incremental. It's very rare that it's like, yeah, 4-hour session. It went from a scratch track or an idea to a completed recording. Like, a lot of times it's these like 1 to 2 hour sessions, right? Where it's like, I'm going to tune vocals tonight. And then, the next, this is after I record drums. That's the first thing. And then maybe it's like, I'm going to now work on my lead guitars. And I can do that at home for the most part because of amp modeling. Thank you, technology. So it's just like slow and steady build. Now I'm gonna start working on the mix. And that's usually like a session or two, maybe even three. But it's for me, it's rarely because of life going on. It's rarely like, 5 hours at a time. It's more, that's what I like about music too. You can be creative in these sort of like shorter bursts versus trying to I have to be on a film set all day as an actor or something like that. It's a different,
Right.
it's a different thing to be a recording artist. And I like the freedom it affords, someone like me. Like, you can work from home. Yes, I play out live and all that stuff, but I do love to record, and it's something that you can do incrementally and kind of on your own time and on your own terms. And nowadays you don't need, thousands of dollars to go into a professional studio. You need to be skilled at putting records together, but that's a
Yeah.
different story.
The recording process always fascinated me ever since I first started reading how the Beatles put together, built the tracks up, and then later reading about how Carl Wilson and the Beach Boys did it, and on and on and on, where you're starting from maybe it's just that riff on that unplugged Strat you said,
Mhm.
but then it's taking a whole different life, and you're just I when I was a kid, I loved building models, right? You had all
Yeah.
these different pieces all over the place. You put it together to make something. Maybe you took it all apart again and add some other things. I used to take old models and put things together. And to me, it's always amazing when songwriters and recording artists they might find a bridge from something else that works, or they're just, I could use another layer of guitar in there, or maybe there's just acoustic guitar in the bridge. To me,
Mm.
that there's some, not only some technical knowledge you need there to do this, doing it on your own, particularly, but also being able to figure that thing out and build it up and be able to just take those ideas and bring them to fruition. That's the building of the songs, the recording, the production of it, to me is fascinating. I really envy what you do, and it clearly pays off because I mean I love your music and I
Thank
love the
you.
sounds you
Thank you
come
so
up with.
much. No, I appreciate that. And I greatly appreciate that. First of all, just kind of an appreciation for the craft and, you know, recognizing, I guess, like the recording process as a instrument in itself, as a form of expression in itself, because, mixing is not easy. I'm a published author on the topic of running, recording, and promoting your band. It's called Indie Rock 101. It's available on Amazon, came out like 13 years ago. But I was like, how can I started mixing my records on Cubase digitally. That was that started in like 2000, right? That's when it was like, wow, you can make music on a computer with an audio input unit. How cool is that? I don't need to spend 4 grand, on a studio or whatever it was back then. So I've been doing that a long time, and that's a whole other conversation outside of being, I think, a songwriter, is like the production aspect of it, which I love. Like, that's probably my favorite thing to do as a musician. There's like songwriting, and there's PR, and there's performing, and getting into gear. There's just so many areas, even as a rock
Sure.
musician, you can really go deep on. But for me, I love the recording process, and I think that's part of that care and craft and passion that kind of keeps me going through, let's say, like a month, right? Of like, wow, you're playing everything. It's not even 4 guys, and that's not to pat myself on the back. It's just because I can. It's just logistically easier for me. I want to give a shout out to my longtime collaborator and bass player, Ron Genchi, who I have played out live with. He plays bass on, I'd say, the majority of my tracks. He's way better than I am on bass. And he's also got that incredible engineer kind of technical side where he is the greatest critical listener I have ever worked with. So I pass all my mixes to him, and I ask him to sign off on them. So that's a little side note. But as far as the recording process, to me, it's almost just as important as the song itself, because I feel like a really good producer can take a mediocre artist or song and make them sound extremely polished. And I think that, I know for a fact how much work that's taken me, and how much self education to, trial and error and kind of like listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, reading books, trying different things, all that stuff. It's like, it's been, you know, what is it, 30 years now, 40 years of mixing or whatever. And there's guys out there where that's what they do day in and day out. I'm fortunate that I'm good enough that I feel like I can put out things that sound the way I want them to, and they sound professional caliber. So if you can do that, that's more power to you if you can record your own stuff and make it sound good. But that's the reason I wrote that book at the time. It was just like, how can I pass along some of the stuff I've learned the painful, hard way to musicians who might want to sound good on their own. Maybe they don't want to go to a studio or have a producer kind of tell them how it should sound. It's more like, how can you express yourself in a way that you want to be heard?
Yeah.
And you need to know how to do that,
And more, especially the past few years, the way the music business has changed so much. I mean, that's really become not only the most financially beneficial way to do it, it's also a necessity. And you're also in control of your own artistic vision. You're your own gatekeeper, essentially.
Yeah, I love the freedom of, I put it like, music for me is very pure. There's nobody, I don't answer to anybody in terms of, oh, the label needs to sign off on this, or like, Ray from Cool Cat doesn't get involved in any of that. He puts out my music and that's that.
He's not coming back to saying, I don't hear a single, I need 3 more songs.
No,
he's not not A&Ring your records.
No, I think he would tell me if a record were terrible and he didn't want to put it out. He'd probably be right. But I like that about being an indie artist, is it's mine. It's like, it's my thing. I can express my stuff the way I want to. My records come out sounding the way I want them to these days, right? Where when I first started really putting out my solo stuff in 2017, like, I wasn't always good at it. It felt more hit or miss for me. Whereas with now, it's kind of like, I'm not saying everything I do is great or every song I write is great, but like, at least they're sounding like, okay, that recording sounds what I was after. So that's always nice when that happens.
Right. So getting back to the music, a couple of things that really stood out to me as I've listened to you over the years, and particularly preparing for this, really digging into a lot of your music. One, you've got a great way of crafting a killer rock riff. So
Thank you.
I do want to talk about the new album that'll be coming in the summer, but before we get to that, I wanted to mention that as far as on your previous records, there's just some great crunchy guitar riffs, but also want to touch on your lyrics. They're very relatable. And this is from someone who, I don't always pay attention to lyrics so much. In fact, I would send my wife songs, or especially when we were dating, and she would say, did you really listen to these lyrics? And this is about somebody breaking up and the guy couldn't take it anymore. And I'm like, but that's not what the chorus is. To me, I love a juxtaposition, just that dichotomy of something upbeat and melodic, but it's also the complete opposite lyrically. But with some of your lyrics that really hit home for me, I love, and they're very relatable. Goodbye to Summer is one, All Alone, Friend Zone in particular. I'd been in that zone a number of times in my life.
Yeah.
That's very relatable. But I got to ask about the genesis behind 2 songs in particular, Bigfoot is an Alien and Keanu Reeves.
Okay.
Great songs, by the way.
Thank you. The first 3 that you mentioned, Goodbye to Summer. What were the other 2 that you
Goodbye to Summer, All Alone, and Friend Zone.
Yeah, so those are interesting songs to cite because they all resonate with me too. And usually, like, if they have deeper meaning for me and they mean more to me lyrically, they're going to connect with the listener, I found. And so I appreciate you calling those out, because Goodbye to Summer in particular has kind of a soft spot in my heart. That's like almost like a theme song. It's in all of my sets. And that's a song where I felt like, wow, I really like nailed what I wanted to sound like. I was actually going for like a Juliana Hatfield kind of feel. And she's one of my 90s idols, and I've been following her for a long time. But I did a video for that song for that reason, just because I really liked it too. So I appreciate you calling that one out. And the other 2 as well, like Friend Zone we've all been there, right? Like that's drawn on personal experience. Fortunately, it wasn't a super consistent trend, but it's like it happens to all of us, I think, male or
It's pretty
female.
much
And
most of my
so,
college, high school and college life. I was always a
right,
great
right.
friend. I was always the great friend after a breakup.
Yeah. And then you realize like 10 years later, 15 years later, what was going on. Like you were stuck in the friend zone at the time. So that's,
Right.
yeah. But Bigfoot's an alien. Uh, that's another kind of special one in my canon because I went through a period, you know, um, 2017 was all this kind of started again. But before that, believe it or not, I was just taking a break from music. I don't think I touched my guitar much, if at all. I had we had our kids, so we had, babies coming along and things like, but that's not why. I was working on a novel. I was very focused on building my career. I was kind of mid-career at that point. And I just wanted to explore other dimensions of my life. I'd come off running a live band and I was kind of burned out on that. And so there was this period of inactivity, but then when I did pick up, I took a year and a half of guitar lessons. For the first time, I was consistent about guitar lessons once a week at home. And I kind of phased out of that. I was like, okay, cool. I've notched up my skills. I mean, I'm not even the greatest. I'm nowhere near like a Richie Kotzen or a technically super technically proficient guitar player, but like I went up a notch by my own standards to where I felt like I can improvise better. I can get better solos. I learned a lot about technique and all this other stuff. But Bigfoot just came out as a riff. And because I didn't want to even get back into mixing and sort of the nuts and bolts of that whole process I described earlier, I was like, I just want to go into a really good studio and have a professional producer make the song sound great. And I don't want to have to, I just want to enjoy playing and performing the song and recording it. I don't want to have to mix it. I want it to come out sounding huge, all that stuff. So I found this guy in San Rafael, a few minutes from my house. His name is Scott Lamas. I want to give him a shout out too, but he's an amazing producer who worked a lot with, I forgot the name of, he mentored, this band that got pretty big. I want to say 21 Gun Salute or something, Six Pistols, or I'm getting the name wrong. He would kill me if he heard this because it's a really big indie band now, but he was this guy's mentor apparently. And he was in bands in the 90s that sounded, up my alley, right? Like Weezer and all this stuff. I'm doing this 90s cover band that I'm in now. And so he and I worked on that song in a couple of sessions and it just opened a floodgate. Like I sent it out to a few bloggers and DJs and things like that. I was brand new at this all over again. I was in the digital era. I back in my early 90s days, I was going to Kinko's and passing out press kits that were printed copies of stuff. So it was just a different world. I was no stranger to the internet or internet marketing. That was my career. I'm still into advertising and stuff like that. But it just kind of, I don't want to say it caught fire and like, oh, I was courted by major labels or anything like that, but it was enough to like, wow, there's actually some interest in this, and the power pop community rallied around it. Bloggers and DJs like yourself, Bob Seska, and I reconnected. So people started playing that. And yeah, I was just really encouraged by that to the point where I was just like, this is a new chapter. This is great. I can write and record as a solo artist. I don't have to like be in a band anymore. I don't really want to run a band. I'm writing the stuff anyway. I don't want to hide behind a band name, all that stuff. So from there, it was just like, I'll make an album. Now I'll make an album. And I recorded the rest of that album myself. I think I did one other song with Scott. He's an amazing producer and made Bigfoot just sound huge. Anyway, as far as the lyrics are concerned, I'm kind of a Bigfoot nerd. If you go to my YouTube channel, I've interviewed a lot of Bigfooters and people that are, known in the field. But it's always just been this area of interest of mine. And so the song is really just an expression of the mystery, like what is it? And
Right.
it's a little tongue in cheek, but it's also kind of, that's the power of music. You can put into words these things that can't literally, like love, quite be expressed sometimes. And so there you have it. That's that's the best way I can describe. But to
Yeah.
this day, I still am very proud of that song, and it's like another kind of signature song. And then I know you asked about Keanu, so
Yeah.
Keanu, yeah. So that I really need to learn how to pronounce his first name properly because you'll notice in the
I always thought it
song
was Keanu.
it
But
is Keanu, and in the song I'm going Keanu, and then I have been corrected by other musicians and friends and whatnot. And it's Keanu, and that song is a heartfelt tribute to, you know, a cultural icon that like you and I he kind of came up
yeah,
when we were coming up in age or whatever, and now
yeah,
he's still at the top of his game. So it was like another tongue in cheek kind of thing, but at the same time, it's a sincere expression of, I guess, like admiration for the guy, how he conducts himself in life and on the film set and in his industry, and just as an, we all know he's no Anthony Hopkins or anything like that, but
right.
like, I mean, the guy's had an incredible career, right? It's like
Absolutely.
you're in The Matrix and River's Edge. It's like you can stop right there.
Exactly. If you did
Those are
nothing
like two of
else,
my favorite movies. Yeah, John Wick, like three of my favorite
right.
movies, and it's like if you're an actor and you have that sort of track record, let alone 30, 40 of those in a row, you're doing something right. And so I think
Yeah.
that speaks to his Zen like calm, and
Yeah.
he's a good guy and all that other stuff. So
Yeah. Not to go too far down the Keanu Reeves rabbit hole, but about a couple months ago, probably because I just started, I don't know how, but you know, how things end up in your Facebook feed. There's this BBC talk show host by the name of Graham Norton, who I think is really funny. He gets these A-list celebrities that you don't see do talk shows here for the
oh,
American actors. And there's a bunch of clips I kept getting with Keanu Reeves telling these hilarious stories. And
that's
he's
funny.
really effervescent and really funny, which doesn't always come across if you just know him from
Yeah.
so many of the movies. And I was just like, I've become a bigger Keanu Reeves fan because he just seems like somebody I would love to have a beer with, and it was really
That's how he seems to
fascinating.
me. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't pretend to know him personally, but like I'm the same, right? Like whenever I hear him interviewed and he says inspirational stuff or funny stuff or whatever, he's an interesting dude,
yeah,
and he's a musician too. He plays bass in this band Dog Star
yeah.
that I think started around the 90s or whatever, but that's just this other side of him. I didn't even cover in my own song, Dog Star. I should have mentioned it. I wanted to stick to his bread and butter
Right, right.
acting career. But like those, it's funny that you call out those two songs because I'm doing a song for my new record. I'm literally recording vocals for it. My next single is going to be the title track from, I don't know how clearly you can see that, but
Shungite.
Shungite.
I
Yes, which
pronounced it
is,
right. All right.
you did good job. And it's a crystal. It's a black rock of some sort that you can only find apparently in a lake in Russia that gives you special energy. And so I wrote this song about the crystal, and I'm not a crystal believer. I don't shop for crystals and things like that. But it's another one of those
It would be
like,
okay. You do live in Northern California. I mean, I would kind of get it if you were.
that's right. And I hike the Mount Shasta area in Northern California and Humboldt, and it just gets more crunchy as you go north, right? Get into Oregon, it's a different planet. Like
Right.
you start to people see auras and stuff like that. But I bring that up because not just to give you a preview of what's next, and that's the name of the album too. But like, it's one of those songs like Bigfoot and Keanu, where if I do anything well, it is by accident. But I have this kind of dorky, quirky indie rock side where when I really like let myself loose, and I'm not trying to be a serious artist or really crap lyrics or something. It's just like the songs that come out easier are like those where it's like, oh, the riff is there. Cool. I'm going to sing about something that interests me or that I care about. It's not about romance or relationships or whatever. And so it kind of falls under those categories. It's not engineered by me, and it's very organic. I wouldn't say that I have 20 of those songs in a row. If I did, I think I'd have a really, really, really solid album. It's more like these topical things come along in my life. For me, songs are very much like time capsules, right? They capture a certain time in your life and where your head is at and sort of what you want to say in that moment, sort of thing. So for me, and talking about like Bigfoot or Keanu or whatever had nothing to do with, oh, these will go viral. Like I'm gonna,
Right.
not to say that I didn't promote them or anything like that. I don't want to be disingenuous, but like they are literally songs that I was like, this would be a good song. I know how to write this song, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write the song about it. And this crystal thing is writing about shungite. It's a similar thing where like I literally was in this gigantic crystal emporium in Shasta, the town. I think it's Shasta, Lake Shasta or something like that. But there's a town that sits at the base of the mountain or close to the mountain. And it's the biggest crystal store you'd ever want to see, like literally like 3 different giant sections. And this black rock, a very large version of this, it was probably a pyramid like this much, costs like, I forget if it was 500 or $5,000. It was very expensive. So I got this baby sample version, but it really caught my eye. And I was like, wow, that is a beautiful rock. So I'm sure your listeners are probably thinking I'm very weird at this point, but true story.
Well, we'll link to your Bandcamp page where the cover is, and I wanted to ask you about the new single and new album, which I want to get into in a minute, but I wanted to just take a sidebar, if you will, because you wear many hats: singer-songwriter, you write your own music, record, perform, produce. You're also an author, but you are also a screenwriter. Correct?
Yes.
And you just had a script optioned, I believe, Holyman?
That's correct. That was now it's been a couple of years, and it's still kind of making its way to certain channels. But yeah, I wrote Holyman. It's kind of a similar thing in songwriting where it's just kind of like something starts to surface. And for me, I started to get interested. I've always been into true crime. And I wanted to be an FBI profiler, believe it or not. And I was like, I'm either going to be very serious about my music after college, or I'm going to start on this path of, building on my psychology studies in college. And I was interested in the early days of profiling, or interested in profiling from its earliest days. And so I had looked into that. And as such, I'm also into like true crime and cults and, mass movements, things like that, right? So I had studied the Manson family before. I was no stranger to their history. I'd read Helter Skelter, but then for some reason I started to get back into that topic. And in doing so, I read this tidbit about, and it was in a Manson biography about, him hanging out with Dennis Wilson. And I was like, that's curious. I had never heard about this episode before. Like I didn't know that was a thing. And so the more I started to look into it, coincidentally, that kind of overlapped with this fascination with the Beach Boys for me. I really started to get into their music. I became fascinated with the music. And I don't remember, all these things kind of started happening around the same time. So there's no like single thing that happened. And then as I started to dig into the story about the Wilson-Manson connection, I reached out to a Manson biographer by the name of Simon Wells. And I said, I never knew that this happened. I'm a musician. I have a screenplay idea. I went to film school. I've written several screenplays. What about bringing this story to life? And Simon was he's a British author. He's extremely encouraging. He was very generous, gracious with his correspondence with me over email. He's like, this sounds like an amazing idea. And so I was like, damn, I'm going to do it. I know that screenplays for me, in between, again, life and everything else, even music, it takes me a good 8 months to a year. Professionals, like you're working full time, you should get a screenplay draft done in 3 months or something like that. But, I want to be very sure that I want to commit to this idea. And I was like, I've never done anything like this. I was very intimidated. I was like, how did you possibly write a 500 to 600 page book about the Manson family and all these different threads, these family members, and stay on a publisher's deadline? And again, he really helped push me. He pushed me, like, my wife was like, you can do it. Like you can do this. And so it's not like you can Google this summer of love between them, or, they knew each other for a long time, by the way. It wasn't just kind of like a few months. And what I had to do is piece together Manson's timeline and little bits and pieces of Dennis's Manson timeline from various sources, whether it was like a little blurb on the internet or an out of print book or two I had to order from Amazon. I've been in touch with numerous Beach Boys biographers. That's how I put it together. I just remember having almost like two stacks of books on either side of my desk and just kind of beating out the story and fleshing that out in a fictional way. But I can say that the screenplay very much reflects what I know transpired between those two guys.
Yeah.
And the connective tissue there was Greg Jacobson. I've spoken to Greg on the phone. Unfortunately, he just had a stroke like 4 months ago or something like that. And so I wish him the best, but like he was very supportive of this script once I finished it. Simon read it and gave me a few notes and all this other stuff. And then a Beach Boys documentary maker who shot the Grateful Dead, the Beach Boys, Elvis. They used some of his footage in the Elvis movie. His name is Malcolm Leo. I count him as a friend these days, but he and I started corresponding and he optioned the script, which was my first option. So that was a huge reason to celebrate. I'm also very proud of it. It's just like a piece of writing. And I really think it's probably one of the best things I've ever written. I've written probably like six to eight screenplays now.
Wow.
Several novels. So that was like a big accomplishment, for me, but I'm looking at Dennis's picture. I have his CD here. I showed it to you earlier.
Yeah, I've got the same. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I just got fascinated by him as a person. We were talking before we started rolling here, and he just was a super, super talented, overlooked individual. And that the screenplay is really just as much about that as it is, this hook of like, the Beach Boys drummer hung out with Charlie Manson. That's crazy. Let me hear more about this. It's really about his redemption. It's about how he had a very near-death experience with his interactions with these crazy people and, who went on a murder spree essentially, but he was living in fear really for the rest of his life or for, many, many, many years after all this went down. And so it haunted him. And the screenplay is called Holyman because that's, of course, a song off Pacific Ocean Blue. And Taylor Hawkins, I'm a huge Foo Fighters fan, and Taylor's one of my favorite living drummers. And so the fact that he was involved, it just kind of like, for me, it was like, Dennis was so talented. And I don't know if you're familiar with this feeling, but when you're a writer and you get close to your subject, you start reading about somebody and kind of learning about their experiences and understanding their psychology. I don't pretend to understand Dennis. I wasn't a friend of his or anything, but as a biographer of sorts, and there are guys that have taken way deeper dives than me even, I couldn't listen to that song. Even now in talking about it, like listening to Taylor complete that song because the lyrics were incomplete. The original release, that song, I don't think was on the original Pacific Ocean Blue release. I'm sure there were 5,000 Beach Boys hardcore fans on the internet who will jump down anything I say. Right. It's been a couple of years since I researched all this, and
I get
spent several months strung, listening to their music and all this other stuff. But like, he just was, he was a tragic figure in a lot of ways because he had so much to offer artistically. And I think even as a person, he was very widely,
he was misunderstood. And I think in a lot of ways
held back. Held back, misunderstood. I think he obviously succumbed to drug addiction. And, that was probably a result of coming full circle from a very difficult upbringing. And, that's a complicated subject in its own. I don't know what to attribute that to. He's in the rock and roll life. So it's like there's drugs everywhere, all that stuff. But he just had so much potential as an artist and a person. And it's a shame that he went off the rails. And I know that his closest friends, I'm not going to name names, but, one of them is still alive. And like I said, Greg is still around and probably one of the few living guys from this time period, right? He was in between Manson's world and Dennis Wilson. But like, Dennis, we know he wasn't a perfect guy. He had a lot of flaws, but, just in thinking about that time period and working on that story, just like, I think of the magnitude of the Beach Boys catalog. I'm going to say something very controversial and sacrilegious. To me, they're much more important than the Beatles. It's not to say that there's no one is better than the other. I just think that they were so important and so creative. And the Beatles
Right.
are too. So maybe I shouldn't say one is better than the other. That's not what maybe I should say the Beach Boys, I connected much more forcefully, right, with their music. I love the Beatles too. We all love the Beatles, but like there's just something about the Beach Boys in their catalog that there's such depth to it. Brian's a genius. We all know that.
Yeah,
Um,
I totally agree. And I mean, I'm a huge, I guess if I had a favorite Beach Boy, it was always Dennis. And as I
yeah,
got older and really read, I mean, I read so many Beach Boys books and so many books about Dennis, and my favorite Beach Boys era really is, as much as, I mean, I love all their stuff, and I certainly appreciate and admire and just, I mean, everything Brian did, especially, up to like say 67 or so before he started kind of slowly checking out. I mean, God Only Knows is the most beautiful song ever made, let's say, right? But there's so much other good music that came about because of Dennis and Carl specifically.
yeah,
And I always looked at that such an opportunity for Dennis, and he shined in a lot of different ways, but because of just that interband dynamics, but also his personal demons, they were never fully realized. And they were for a minute with Pacific Ocean Blue, I thought. And at that point, the
yeah.
Beach Boys were pretty much damn near over for a minute. I mean, they were, Carl was doing a solo thing. Brian was he back? Was he wasn't back? He was back, kind of propped up on stage. And had I been there at that time, I would kind of always look at it kind of empathetically with friends and acquaintances and family. It's like, if you knew what was going to happen 4 or 5 years later, would you even try it even harder? Because that potential was realized for a minute. It was building
Yeah.
and building, and then it just all went away because of his personal demons. And getting back to the Manson part, so many people, a lot of people don't know that story at all. So I think your script sounds absolutely fascinating. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
he did live in fear for essentially the rest of his life because it wasn't just hanging out. They moved into his house. I mean,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Charlie was
They
trying to
threatened
get
his
him to
life.
record songs. Yeah.
Yeah, they straight up, they were very nasty, bad people. They were criminals. They just, they haunted him. They stalked him, and it's terrible. But, getting back to the positive, which I really tried to end this whole story on a positive note. And like I said, the last scene of it takes place at Tower Records at sunset, where he's doing like a press kind of event for the record. And the end of I don't want to give the ending away. I'll actually I'll send it to you. I'm happy for you to read it if you want to
No,
read
I
it.
would
But
absolutely
like,
love to read it.
no, thank you. But yeah, that record, I agree with you. I think if he had more confidence in the support of the band, it could have been a lot bigger than it was. I'm sure I'm not the only person that feels that way, but and again, I wasn't there. I'm speaking as a sort of as a biographer, right? Or somebody
Right.
who knows a lot about the history of that record getting put out. There are guys out there I know who know 5,000 times more than I do, like the detail, like, well, the mixing knob on that song was colored green and all this other stuff. But
Yeah.
I mean, it can get kind of next level, right? We know Beach Boys fans how serious they are, and so I treated the subject very seriously. But I think I don't want to speak for Dennis or anyone around him at that time, but I think if the band kind of let him down, like they were like, you have to choose between your solo thing or us. And so where
Right.
does it put it? Where does it put him? We're talking about a guy with two brothers in the band. So it's like he's not going to be like, well, to screw you, but it's hurtful, right? Those things
Yeah.
hurt. He could be
Because
the
he always
toughest
did
guy
have
in
a
the
loyal.
world.
He had such a loyalty to his brothers
Very
and
loyal,
the
very
band
loyal.
itself,
Yeah,
despite all the drama there and him getting kicked out a couple times and being replaced by Ricky Fittar because of injury and
yeah.
missed shows and stuff. He's still, I mean, obviously it was his primary source of income. He spent money like nobody's business, but there was also an emotional loyalty there because by the end there, I mean, they started this band when they were kids in 1960, for goodness sakes.
There's a scene in the screenplay that actually it might not have happened exactly the way it's depicted, but it did. I'm correcting myself because actually it did happen where he told Brian when Brian was in bed for however many months and suffering from clearly mental illness and his own sort of pain from self-perceived failures. His music wasn't hitting the way it should and all this other stuff. But he said, like, I don't care about the band and all this other stuff. Like, as your brother, what can I do to help you? I want you to get better. And, this is before I think we know so much more now about mental illness and how to get people at least on the right track.
Right.
And this is a dysfunctional family to begin with an abusive father, right? So it's like, but here's a guy who is enough of a little brother, not even a big brother, but mature enough as a little brother to say to his big brother, who he idolized, how can I help you? We're going to put everything else aside, get off the crazy train. I'm getting chills talking about it because
I know, I hear you.
That's the Dennis Wilson that I think forged such deep connections with his inner circle and even outside his inner circle, let alone fans, right? But like, I think that's where he had this ability to forge connections and relationships, like with kids even. And again, I don't mean to sugarcoat his character or say he was a perfect human being. He wasn't, but like, he had these moments of true generosity and artistic brilliance that I think you just wonder, like, why wasn't this person lionized in his own time? And a couple things. I think it was his own confidence. I think his band didn't support him. His label didn't support him. I think he had asked for like a larger backup band and they were like, no, that sounds too expensive. I recall stories like that going around at the time. And again, I'm sure even more knowledgeable biographers might correct me on some of these details, but like, I don't think for someone like Dennis, I don't know if he had the fortitude, being part of the Beach Boys machine, to step outside that and get the best of both worlds, because he didn't have that wave to help push him and that album forward,
Right.
So
right.
So I'm not saying like he was a total victim and life shortchanged him. He could have taken the reins, I think, a little more strongly, but I also don't know if he was that kind of person, because look at what he was surrounded with, right? In the form of the machine and the Beach Boys and all that other stuff. And as a person too, it's like, look how long it took him to come out of his shell come into his own as an artist because of these other factors, these surrounding factors. And so I think, and that's woven into the script too, that whole, he pushes out and becomes his own creative force. To me, that was the most positive outcome of his time with Manson. It was like you spend some time with the devil, and if you can come out of that with this sort of record and at least having that moment in life where you're like, I came into my own, however briefly, I put this damn record out. I hope he was able to celebrate at least that,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I hear you. I could talk about that all night, but I do want to get into, because I'm absolutely just always been fascinated by Dennis in particular and all the Beach Boys. But I do want to get into the fact that you just put out a new single, Small Fry, with a terrific video on YouTube. And I know Small Fry is available through Bandcamp, and that's from the forthcoming album you talked about. Small Fry, from what I read, song has some history.
Yes. Thank you for watching. I shot
video.
that two weekends ago. Thank you. But yeah, that's another one of those kind of songs that I loved it when I first wrote it and recorded it with my Philadelphia guys in the movies. That was circa 2002 or something like that. I can't believe how long ago that was. But it just started to surface again for me as something where I was like, that fits this new record coming out, which is, again, it's like a heavier, more aggressive sounding record than my last several probably, which are, there's a lot of more laid back kind of stuff. But I was like, I have to re-record this. I want it to sound heavier and I want it to be part of this record. I want to reintroduce it to like a whole new crop of basically like people that I am in touch with, like people like yourself included. Bob Seska heard it all those many years ago, but just people that are listening to my music now, I wanted them to hear like an updated version of a song that to me sounds very now. And they can be like, Rich, you're really delusional. This still sounds like Live meets the presidency of the United States. And what was the other band? My friend said it reminded him of. I forget. There was a third, but it was like a trio of pretty good '90s bands. I was like, I'll take that. That's cool. But I don't trade in nostalgia music. I don't create music where I'm like, hey, that's that guy that, wants to sound like the Beatles, or that's that guy that wants to sound like Fleetwood Mac or the Eagles, whatever it is, right?
You don't have you don't have a retro throwback sound.
I'm not. I'm
Even
not
if you're
about
influenced
that.
by that. That's not you.
No, I want to, if I had it my way, stuff I'm putting out like now, people can say like, wow, that's got like a '90s feel to it. That's cool. But I still want it to be like, to me, it sounds how I would love music to sound today. It's
right.
like,
Sure.
I don't think we need to live in a homogenized society where everything, sounds the same. And I don't think we did. Like, I grew up on '80s music, which was incredibly diverse in terms of feel and genre and the people playing it. Like, I feel like the '80s is one of the most diverse times in popular music we've ever had. People were very accepting of all kinds of sounds, right? It wasn't just about grunge, indie rock, pop punk type stuff. Like the '90s was like the labels were signing any band that they could. And so there was almost like a collective sound after Nirvana hit it so big and it went mainstream. There was this buying spree, right, on the label's part. But before that, in the '80s, it was just like, if you're a good band and you can play your instruments and you have a great sound, like, awesome. I grew up on MTV. We were one of the first households with MTV. So like starting in 1982 or 83 or whatever it was, I was like seeing the Culture Club and Dexy's Midnight Runners and the Human League. And I mean, you name it. It was like these bands were from all different corners of society, even, and let alone, the UK and the States. They were from Australia, like Men at Work. So it was just like, I just felt like it was a very, very rich time in music to grow up.
Genre wise, it was, MTV was almost especially if you lived in a place where maybe there was only a classic rock station, maybe a pop station. I mean, if it wasn't for MTV, when I look back, especially in the '80s, we got cable, the early '80s as well. And I mean, I just spent hours watching that and Friday night videos. And I would never have fallen in love with a band, say like Big Country, if that first single wasn't all over MTV. Yeah. And that launched a fandom that went all the way, through every single record. Right. I mean, so many songs I would never have discovered.
Did you know any other band that sound like Big Country? No, because
not at all.
Every band sounded like its own thing to a very large degree. Now, that was probably before we get into hair metal. Right. And then it was like, you start to confuse. I love hair metal, by the way. Like, unironically.
Same here.
Like, I love Motley Crue. I love Quiet Riot. I love like Def Leppard, as you know. I don't even know. I guess Def Leppard was hair metal, but like there was a slew of them. A lot of them weren't, I wasn't fans of it. Like, that's when I think, again, that buying spree, right? It's like,
well, labels all jumped on the trends, right?
Yeah,
so I mean,
exactly.
There was these MTV bands in particular broke guys with amazing haircuts out of England played synth pop. Suddenly there was a bunch of bands, and so there was, Men Without Haircuts and No Haircut 100. And, I'm joking, but, I mean, labels were famous through the 80s and 90s, just, and somewhat, I'm sure today too, but especially as the CD era completely blew.
Yes.
And my background is in the record business through that time frame from late 80s through 10, 12 years ago. And so
thank you for everything you did.
Yeah.
You guys did a great job.
Or you're saying that sarcastically, but
no, I'm not. I'm saying it.
But I could
appreciation.
But I could tell you, I mean, just you saw this as a fan, but also living it. I mean, it's like alternative breaks. Oh my gosh, we're signing any band we can find in plaid, in a lumberjack shirt or whatever. I mean, so we're gonna tune down and we're gonna stare at our shoes and we're just gonna chase that, And
yes.
And it's a shame because that also put out to pasture, particularly the quote unquote hair metal folks, but. So many bands that end up being outside of a trend, they would still be putting out great music. It's the industry or the cognoscenti or whoever, the media just passed them by. And you got to hope that they've made a great enough career for themselves where they can, if they still want to do it, they can still do it. So the new album, however, Shungite is
Shungite.
coming this summer. Do you have a release date yet?
Yes. I'm gonna shoot for my birthday is August 22nd. I'm not gonna say that's official, but that's been my release kind of cadence these last several years, where it's like you have the holidays, and then kind of like springtime, I start to like get more active, and then by the summer, it's like people are having fun, and so I'm
Sure.
looking at if it's April now. I want to do like two or three more songs now that the theme itself has crystallized in the sound. Like there's a couple of tracks, this happens every time, where it's like that's just not right for this record, and I won't even put it out. Now that I have like a very clear sense and body of work, there's like I think six or seven of the songs are done now. I want to do like three more, like two or three more. I've got the next one written already, where I'm just like I'm really like I'm really leaning into the sound I'm going for, which I love stuff like Sugar these days, and I shouldn't say these days because it's a long-standing love affair with just kind of like more stripped down and aggressive pop indie
Yeah.
rock kind of sound. Bob
And
Mould's like back out on the road, and so it's just like it seems like a good time. I didn't know that was going to happen before I started going down this path,
yeah, and
but
you
I think
did say
there's a
this new
newfound
record.
appreciation for that stuff.
Yeah, you did say this new record is going to be heavier, right? A
Yes.
little bit more harder
Yeah.
rocking. So I'm
Yeah.
really interested in what end what that ends up sounding like.
Well, Small Fry's a taste of that, but I mean the thing I'm working on now, like I exhausted myself recording drums on it. Like it's a heavy hitter. So I'm looking forward to people that have heard my last, I don't know, six, seven albums or whatever, to be like, wow, this is different. Like this is loud. Like this is cool. It's rocking. We're in turbulent times. Um, I think for me, it's like, I do what feels right. Some albums feel more mellow than the other. Other albums are a little more, this is a real grab bag of stuff. This one's very like, I made a conscious decision. I'd like it to sound very cohesive and like a slick rock record, basically like Dave Grohl when he did The Color and The Shape. That's what he was going for at that time.
Right.
He's done such a wide variety of stuff, and some people might say like, oh, the Foo Fighters all sound the same. That's not true. I think if you go
No,
from
no,
record,
no.
they all have a different feel to them, which I think is really cool. And for this one, it's like I'm going for that more. This is really well produced. It's very heavy, and not like Tool or anything like that, but it's just like in comparison to my other stuff, this sounds more like a Sugar record or more like a um what's a good example? Nirvana, but not with the screaming. So, it's a different thing. That's why The Color is black. It's like I'm leaning into this sort of, ooh, that's heavy. It's almost like I'm
Right.
thinking this record is more like I'm playing with my current guys as a trio, and I'm really enjoying that because I can hear my guitars come out more. And I'm not like a virtuoso, so it's not about like so I can play Eddie Van-esque like leads. It's just so that I can hear that heavy rhythm and that heavy rhythm section in the heavy guitars, and
What's
that's coming out.
you're hearing what's driving the song, right? What's a
Totally,
bit more,
totally.
yeah. The
Yeah.
horsepower behind it, I guess, is the way I kind of envision that.
Exactly. Like when I'm working with a lead guitarist now on this 90s cover thing, and like we have to be conscious of our tones. We have to be conscious of our volume with each other, our arrangements and things like that. But it's just like, you know, and there's lead guitar on this record that's coming out. Of course, there's going to be overdubs and things like that, but it's really about like that that sheer force, if you will, and just kind of that power of the song, I guess. More muscle. Good way to put it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
well, well, right on, Rich. I'll tell you, I really enjoyed this. Thanks for the time. I could talk to you for another hour, so I'm 2 hours ahead of you. So,
Yeah, time for bed.
yeah, but I really do appreciate you doing this, and everybody will find all the links and everything in the show notes and on all your platforms and YouTube. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. This has really been one of the best interviews I've done. I love the questions that you ask, and all the appreciation. I really appreciate you being such a great listener to my stuff. So let's keep in touch, and thank you so much for having me. And I hope your listeners check out my stuff and sign up to hear about Shungite when it comes out. So thank you.
Will do.